Good morning, everyone. My name is Joe Sapienti. I'm the Associate Vice President of Case for Quality Collaborative Community for MDIC. I am pleased to welcome you to Day 2 of the Case for Quality Collaborative Community April Forum. We are very excited about the agenda we have for you today. We are pleased to have put together the list of talented presenters and speakers to provide you updates on Safespace and MDIAS. Later today, we will hear from our panel on leadership engagement. I'm very excited to be introducing this morning's session on Safespace and MDIAS. Remember, we'll be hosting a live Q&A at the end of the morning session. To get things started, welcome to the team from Safespace. And with that, I'll pass it over to the team for their updates on Safespace. Thank you.
Hi, this is Mark Rukevich and Catherine Mack to give an update on Safespace. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, MDIC forum participants and the collaborative community. It's wonderful to have the opportunity today to give more information about Safespace. Safespace is a new initiative under the Case for Quality. We've been working together since late last year on this project. For this new initiative, we have 4 topics to review today. Let's look at those 4 topics on the next slide. Today's 4 topics are on the screen. We'll start with the mission of Safespace, and after the mission, the working group will be introduced with the members and the names and the affiliations. Since it's a new initiative, we've combined our Safespace onto one slide. We'll talk through our process and describe our very early successes. All right, moving on to the mission of Safespace, which is shown on the next slide. Our mission, our need is to, despite our best efforts, we know that the information about medical device safety and quality is not openly shared. This results in missed opportunities to collaborate on the resolution to mutual and systemic problems, potentially leading to inferior outcomes for the patient. Our goal is to establish a trusted environment so that manufacturers and government can share issues and best practices to improve device quality and patient safety without fear of punitive action or impacting anyone's competitive advantage. Our focus is to serve as a sounding board for potential CfQ program studies to gauge potential impact, to share best practices in light of the CfQ program study results, to collaborate on intervention strategies when there are shared opportunities. Now that I've covered the mission, you're probably wondering who's working on this initiative. The next slide will give us the names of the working group members. The working group was comprised of members across the collaborative community. The names are listed with representatives from MDIC, FDA, small to medium-sized firms, and large medical device firms. As you can see, the different members we've been working pretty hard over the last 6 months. The next is an update on our Safespace process and early successes. We are following a process that includes key elements of identification, scoping, analyzing, and communicating. We want to conduct a Safespace pilot to test drive these concepts, explore how to process different data sources from across the Case for Quality collaborative community. We want to review the MDIAS proof of concept results. We want to recognize and vet broader Case for Quality collaborative community topics that emerge. We're going to develop a Safespace charter and then report back to the CfQ steering committee in May of 2021. We've been brainstorming with a bit of forming and storming to identify the best pilot concepts. We are landing on 3 topics: complaints, recalls, and supply chain. That may have the right impact on our collaborative community or the medical device ecosystem. While in the midst of our discussions, we're excited for our success to identify realistic and manageable pilots. To wrap it all up, our next slide provides our email addresses and a thank you. Thank you for listening to our update, and we have the emails on the screen. If you want a question, you can send it to MDIC forum for the panel discussion. Thanks again.
Hi, I'm Al Kraus with CVRX, and I'll be presenting an update on the Medical Device Information and Analysis Sharing Program, also known as MDIAS, and the governing committee work, along with Ravi Nabar from Illumina and Sarah Sulfridge from Baxter. Next slide. As many of you may remember, the MDIAS initiative was started about a year ago, and the idea here was that currently the data practices are very fragmented in the medical device industry. Each different group, FDA, medical device industry participants, and healthcare providers have their own data that they're collecting, and the actions that are taken with relation to this data are oftentimes late and reactive. And the idea here is if we formed a partnership between government and the private sector, that we could come up with a more systemic approach to things and have more predictive and analysis and better utility of that data. Next slide. So how MDIAS works, this is what's been being worked on in the past year, and basically the partners that I talked about before, the medical device manufacturers, the providers, and the FDA all have data. And currently what we have been doing is taking some of the FDA public data, and we're working with a trusted third party, and that trusted third party is the MITRE Corporation. And they have done this with other industries and other groups to develop similar sorts of analytical capabilities over data across those industries. And so we've been taking data from the public data, ingesting it to the system, de-identifying it, and ultimately at that point loading it into a system, a data system that can then be analyzed. And there have been different use groups that have been developed to analyze that data, and it's sort of a circular process at that point in time for MITRE to look at the data and work with it and present results back to the group, who then talk about what that might mean. And those groups that are looking at it are representatives from the device manufacturers, providers, and FDA. And from that analysis, we'll send the information back with more direction to the trusted third party to do additional analysis and come up with more and more detailed information that hopefully gets us to our outcomes, which are improved overall device quality, better predictive analytics that will tell us about problems earlier in the cycle so we can take action quickly, and then ultimately high quality patient outcomes, because that's really what we're all after. Once an analysis is completely done, then the data will be purged from the system. So this isn't a thing where once you provide data, it lasts there forever. I'd now like to pass it on to Sarah to talk a little more about the governing committee work.
Thanks, Al. I'm happy to give a brief update on the formation of the MDIAS Governing Committee. Very simply, this committee is the decision-making body responsible for the MDIAS program strategy and oversight. We began in early 2020 with a governance working group with members from across the entire medical device ecosystem. This working group created a preliminary charter outlining the accountabilities and responsibilities of the participants, as well as establishing expectations for the studies that are included in the proof of concept and for moving forward. More recently, meaning in March of 2021, a separate selection council appointed the initial cohort of the governing committee. This newly appointed governing members include 5 voting or decision-making members and 2 strategic advisors. Now, collectively, we are representatives from both large and small medical device manufacturers, and these members today are Al Kraus, CVRX, Rob Crone from Boston Scientific, and myself with Baxter Healthcare. In addition, we have the provider community represented with Dr. Michael Rulin, and finally, FDA's CDRH represented with Dr. Owen Ferris. And our advisors are Joe Sapiente from the Case for Quality Collaborative Community and Steve Silberman representing a trade association. I think it's important to state that as the MDIAS program evolves, we expect that additional representatives will be necessary. And this includes expanding the number of and type of organizations, as well as ensuring that the right skills are present among the members. In fact, in the near term, we'll most likely be looking to onboard a statistician who can help ensure consistency with interpreting the results of the studies across all of the various members. So now that we have this new group together, let me explain just a little bit more about what it is that we'll actually be doing. We are responsible for making decisions regarding the MDIAS program strategy and any program changes. This includes things like identifying new opportunities and mitigating any risks that are associated with either expanding to other types of stakeholders or other types of studies. We'll also then approve requirements and accountability measures for participation. The governing committee is collectively accountable for defining baseline performance measures, defining and prioritizing research topics, prioritizing data collection activities, and approving the release of recommendations, as well as some of the other analytical products. And even with all of that accountability, I believe our most important role is to ensure that a study is completed with the utmost integrity of the data, it follows analytical process, and the findings are clear, and the confidentiality of the data and submitters is maintained. And I'm excited to say that we held our first full governance meeting on April 1st of this year and have already begun to shape the priorities for the committee and the program. I'm really looking forward to watching this entire program grow, as the initial studies that are being evaluated in the proof of concept have been very interesting so far. And I'm energized by the snippets of what we've been seeing at this early stage and excited for the full final results. So to that end, I want to ask Al and Robbie if they'll share a little bit on each of the two case studies. So Robbie, I'll hand it to you. Next slide, please.
Sure. Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, I'd like to share just some of the thinking and discussions that went into the formulation of some of the studies that that we just referred to. I recall a pre-COVID meeting at MITRE headquarters in February 2020 that involved stakeholders from various companies, AdvaMed, FDA, MDIC. It was coordinated by MITRE. And this was followed by many months of discussions that actually led to the formulation of the use cases, which were the cases that were being studied. And we were thinking about really, how does high quality correlate to predicate device quality? Are there devices with quality problems but still approved? And then, how does this tie to the count of MDRs, for example, the medical device reports and predicate devices? And that kind of led to two things. One was a question about how's that predicate device quality associated with 510K submissions, and we kind of shelved that for a while, and we called that use case 11. But what we started to focus on first was a fundamental question about how are root causes of recalls distributed. And there was a meeting with the FDA at which we had a lot of discussion, and a use case subgroup was formed that was led by Chris Dibble, a Stryker. It had others such as Daniel Walter from the FDA, Mike Rulin from Atrium, Mike McCarthy from Baxter, Mike Collins from Edwards, Stephanie Fossat, Dominguez from Celanova, and myself. And fundamentally, that group was trying to basically understand what was the amount of data, public and private, and can we focus on the public data? What should the scope of this be? And we kind of settled on 2010 to 2019, which is kind of like a 10-year span to look at the data. And try to understand kind of how much data was there that needed to get looked at. And it turned out to be quite a bit. So there was a lot of discussion about how many staff years this would take and how would we avoid getting into rabbit holes. And so the understanding was if you kind of pluck low-hanging fruit first, apply the best of training and analysis that we could to put the public data set, while preparing ourselves to actually enrich that data set with private data that would come through a safe space that Al mentioned and Sarah alluded to earlier. And so really a time frame was set for delivering some good analyses, including visualization, training. And the first thing that the MITRE group and the work group here did was to basically look at root cause descriptions and understand that data set and how did it link to the FDA FERLs and MAUD databases through K numbers and PMAs. And then the objective was also to kind of link to the enforcement and inspections database to figure out what were these recalls by root causes, and then to formulate some hypotheses that would kind of allow us to take the next step to understanding what was then called as use case number 9, which Al will talk about shortly. And that was to understand if there was a predictive relationship between medical device reports and recalls. And in looking at that, the MITRE organization essentially first looked at the recalls and said, hey, how are we going to organize this? How are we going to make any sense out of this for such a large data set? And it was agreed that between January of this year and May, there would be some results that would be produced. And I'm happy to say that there's been a lot of good work done and a lot of progress made along those lines, and we hope to see some more definitive outcomes from that study group by this summer. Now, what that would all lead to would be essentially, as Al mentioned, a collaborative analysis that's going to be done by MITRE, and MITRE is the organization, MDIAS is obviously the program, the initiative we're talking about, but it's a trusted third party which would then collate, kind of aggregate the results and do a certain amount of training and benchmarking that would allow us to essentially answer the question, who done it for the future? In other words, can we actually predict a recall before it occurs? So that's kind of a quick overview, a quick background. If you go to the next slide, please. And we'll just take a quick look at the use case that's called use case pay, which is the root causes of recalls before plunging into the topic that Al will discuss, which is the predictiveness of MDRs recalls. So this was a fundamental sort of analysis done with one single database that is a public database on the root causes of recalls. And at the very outset, it became pretty clear that there was some missing links. And we had to essentially then connect this to the FERLs and MAUD data set through the K and PMA numbers. And what MITRE and MIDAS actually identified was the data set contained over 170,000 unique recall events with over 45,700 unique products, and actually spanned a period of 1997 to 2020. As I mentioned before, we kind of just honed in on the 2010 to 2019 data set because that was a more complete data set. And within that data set were 25 elements. There were 3 types of recalls. There were 43 types of root cause descriptions and 3 rich text fields. So what's going on now is an analysis that will essentially use artificial intelligence technology, advanced trending technology, and identify what are the root causes, how are they connected to the enforcement inspections data set, and essentially then, is there some sort of a connection that we can derive between the information that's looked at here and the reason for the recall, as well as the next steps towards actually predicting recalls. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Al to discuss the predictiveness of MDRs. I was actually the co-chair for that particular sub-team, and I know that a lot of good progress has been made on that, which Al will describe next. Al?
Thank you, Ravi. As Ravi mentioned, there's an enormous amount of data to be analyzed, and he talked a lot about the overall volume of data, and we were looking at similar data with this group because we are, as he mentioned, looking at recalls But then we were also tying in the number of MDRs and how they might be associated. So one of the first things we did as a group was go through the details of what different data fields were in the FURLs, MAUD, and recalls data sets that FDA was able to provide, to make sure that we understood as a team what data were being analyzed. Some of the early work that MITRE had done was telling us that there was associations with things that we didn't understand, mostly because we didn't understand the databases. And so we did figure that out and ultimately came to the conclusion that that we needed to theorize some categorizations of interest within MDRs because there was such a large data set. So we provided those potential categories, and MITRE started breaking down the data into those things and helping give us feedback on what was happening there. And ultimately what we found out in some of the early work is that it appears that there may be a correlation between MDRs on implantable and single-use products, and also MDRs that are related to products that have had earlier recalls or similar products with recalls, that each of those makes it more predictively likely that there will be a recall in the future. Again, these are preliminary analyses, but our indications are that this does appear to be what's going on. And I think it makes some logical sense because the implantables and single-use products are the higher risk products, and those have a tendency to be more of a concern with recalls. And obviously the earlier recalls or similar products with recalls, if you have a product that you find an issue with and there's other associated 510K or you know, ancillary products that were based off that same approach, likelihood is that there may be recalls with those as well because of those approaches. So that's where we're at, and we continue to work going forward, as Robbie mentioned. And that's our summary for MDIAS. And we'd like to now move on to the live Q&A.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, and welcome to the live Q&A. We have one question that did come in through the participants, and I'll go into it right away. So for those of you that are on the live as participants and watching the live Q&A, we have Sarah, Catherine, Robbie, and Owen with us today. The question that came from wants to know, can we speak to the overlap and intended use case differences between MDIAS initiative and NEST? And I would imagine that probably relates to the data collection and real world evidence and maybe active surveillance. So maybe this one can be for Owen and Robbie. You guys, Owen, do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure. I mean, I think that they are synergistic, right? There's a lot of excitement around NEST being able to identify high quality real world data sources, figure out how to optimize quality and utility of those sources, and make the linkages between the entities that have those data and the entities that can benefit and really put those data to use and move you know, the knowledge base forward. You know, to me, MDIAS is solving a different but synergistic problem, which is, you know, there are a lot of people in parallel, a lot of entities in parallel, I believe, in this space that are trying to solve the same problems, but not in collaboration with each other. They're doing it on their own. Different entities might have different pieces of the puzzle, you know, and there may be ways in which we can learn from each other and come to a better solution. There might be some problems that we can't solve in isolation, but we could all solve together. You know, and to me, that's very consistent with the overall case for quality mission in general, the mission is, compliance is the floor, compliance is, what we all need to achieve, but really the goal is quality. We want to, all of us benefit from improving the quality of products. Patients benefit, industry benefits, and really the entire ecosystem benefits. And if we can have an environment where we can share information, we can solve problems together, we can protect the proprietary nature of some of that information so that we all can roll up our sleeves and do it together, that is all part of that same effort. Ravi?
Yeah, I think you captured that pretty well. If I could just add a couple of things there, Owen. So the overlap. The question was about the overlap, and this is like putting two different, maybe more than two different, actually, pieces of puzzle together. So the data sets that we're looking at out of the study that we're doing with the use cases really try to understand the root causes of recalls and recalls as they vary by device type, by product type, down to a product code level and possibly a K number. So the missing link or the thread that connects then to the other side, which is the NEST side, would be getting more specific on the particular event type connected to the device particular and potentially to a particular type of patient event. And so that's where the missing link is, and that's where the overlap was likely to be. What we're trying to do with the MDIAS study is first understand what are the things that cause recalls. For example, supply issues have been identified as pretty important. Yes, for design issues, labeling issues, these types of things have been identified as being high on the frequency end of the cause of recalls. There's also been a sort of a significant effort to make sure that we understand the correlation between the reported event and which medical device is recalled, and that's where the connection with NEST is probably going to be pretty important, because as I mentioned, we can get down to a certain level of information based on the MAUDE and the FERLs and the OpenFDA.gov data, recalls data. What we don't have is the other side of the equation, which NEST can hopefully help us get to with contracts that they have with organizations that then provide specific event level, potentially scrubbed patient level data that can help us connect that thread to specific event types and the details, call it the metadata surrounding that recall event or set of recall events. It's a great question. Thank you.
If I could add one more point to that too, I think both for the NEST test cases and for the MDIAS use cases, I think we're hopeful that there will be meaningful, useful answers from those specific cases. But I think there's another value proposition there, which is to learn how the system operates, to see what gaps there are, how can we do things better the next time. And so it really is a test case. It is, hoping to find and intending to get some utility out of the specific case. But just as important, at least from my perspective, is what do we learn about the system, what works well, what could be done better, and how do we dial that into the next set of cases we take on.
So, Catherine, I'm going to look to you and kind of get your point of view now as we hear, again, overlap, right? We heard on Safespace that you guys are looking at complaints, recalls, and supplier quality. And we heard Robbie talk about some of the issues and potential recall sources is supplier quality. So how is Safespace starting to also connect the dots? Because I would imagine that one of the things we're thinking about, and you mentioned this in the update, is the trusted environment. The ability to have that conversation in a trusted environment. So if we are connecting the dots, if you would, we're collecting information not only through NEST and MDIAS, but then we're creating that trusted environment to have those conversations about potential problem solving, prevention, and predictive analytics. So what are your thoughts there from a Safespace perspective?
Yeah, so Joe, on Safespace and MDIAS, they both share data reporting and result reporting, but they have a different scope and an approach. So with MDIAS, there's more data analysis going on, and with Safespace, it's more about collaboration, learning from each other, sharing new practices or best practices. And Safespace is still new. There's a lot more to be done under Safespace. We're still identifying our pilot and we're starting the scoping activity. So we're focusing on 3 areas. We're probably going to spend more time on recalls, but there'll be more an emphasis on practices and establishing a trusted foundation rather than digging into all the details.
Okay. And Sarah, comment or thought?
Yeah, I think the other key difference between the two, Joe, is from a safe space perspective, the issues are fairly well known. They're just not discussed collaboratively across the industry. And in MDIAS, we're dealing with issues that are unknown. And so I think that's the other key differentiator.
But do you see that as we start to learn more through MDIAS, how do we leverage the framework that we're putting in place for safe space so that we can have those conversations to, as we learn more, we bring that, we bring folks into that trusted environment to do more problem solving or solution, developing solutions and things like that. Anyone have a thought about that?
Yeah, sure. If I may, so both Catherine and Sarah hit the nail on the head with the direction we're going in. I just wanted to add, there's obviously the awareness and the recognition within Safespace. There's a lot more rich data and knowledge that can be obtained through private data sources. And those are currently not in the scope of the use cases that are being worked on because we decided to work on the publicly available data set first. But there's an effort within MDIAS to essentially, and within the safe space, to filter the data, scrub it, anonymize it, and then encourage collaboration by contributing private data sets to that public data set. And then the combination of the public and the private data sets will give us more information to get more specific about some of the predictive nature and potentially the whodunit. And so from a where's the next recall going to happen perspective. So Al Krause mentioned this in his presentation. There's a circle in the center, and he said how the data comes in is going to get scrubbed, is going to get filtered, anonymized, trended, analyzed, and then reported. So that activity is actually taken root. There's been a good deal of work going on at MDIAS, at MITRE, to create that framework, that mechanism. And then the next step will be obviously to get into data use agreements that'll then encourage collaboration and a sharing of private data. We all know we collect data in complaint files. We've got data internal to corporations that actually have richer data set. And the hope is that in Safespace we can get that data set combined with the public data set and get better, richer information that can be then shared and leveraged across the whole industry.
Okay. Well, we don't have any other comments or questions that came in through the audience participation. So I'm going to take a minute and ask each of you to maybe, and I'll start with Sarah. Can you kind of give us your thoughts on what's the value and the why is this a good idea? Why is MDIAS and Safespace? Why are these good ideas for us to really pursue?
Sure.
As a community.
Happy to add. Patient safety and product quality is our #1 priority, and it always will be. And at some point, a single company can make their products as safe as possible and take the patient into consideration as much as possible. But if we don't have a shared view across experiences and data sets and an ability to share that knowledge across, we won't break through to that next level and address all of the needs of the patient, as well as addressing that patient safety. So for me, it's really a chance to learn from the best of the best while attacking something that could really elevate the safety of our products and our patients.
Terrific. Catherine?
Yeah, so the question is, why is this a good idea, whether it's MDIAS or Safespace? Like Sarah just mentioned, we're all very passionate about ensuring patient safety and working on better outcomes. So we share that. But it's also a good idea because we're leveraging other industry practices, such as what the aviation industry has done with safety with airplane flights. So we're using some of those practices from other industries, which they use data analysis practices like MDIAS. They use collaborative techniques like Safespace is doing. So with these new approaches, we're getting excited about being able to talk openly with each other about shared concerns so that we can continue to improve patient safety. So that's why I'm involved. I think it's a good idea, and I look forward to more work on this.
And quickly, Catherine, can you just remind us the 3 areas within Safespace that you guys are looking at?
Yeah, the 3 areas we've identified is recalls, complaints, and supplier management. Now, those are 3 broad areas, so obviously there's a lot more detail to get into. And we're looking at scoping the recall area first, so I expect we'll report back on recalls next time.
Terrific. Thank you. Ravi?
Yeah, I think you all captured most of, the salient points. I just want to add one little thing, if I may, and that is that I'm really excited about this. I think I'm excited because I can see the use of technology is going to enrich this data set tremendously. And the collaboration that we're going to be able to attain because of Safespace is going to give us new dimensions and new views into the root causes of recalls, into types of, kind of the reasons that certain types of products have recalls and the root causes behind those. It'll really lead to a better awareness and then therefore hopefully a better sharing of information and knowledge across the industry that will help us prevent from occurring before they occur. Yeah, so this is truly the stab at preventive action. So the best practices that we identify through these will actually lead to preventive action. And so in a classic sense, that's where we want to go. We want to keep problems from happening before they happen. It's a little bit of a whodunit, and that's what's exciting to me. But it won't happen without a tremendous amount of artificial intelligence and the application of tools, natural language processing, possibly blockchain technology that'll allow us to kind of anonymize and filter data sets and have really, really large data sets that we can then derive really intelligent information from, which is beyond what we're able to do today. So that's why I'm excited about it. And the collaboration is the only way to go about it. And Safespace is the way to create that trusting environment that will allow people to share data that otherwise sits in the coffers of companies that just don't want it out there. And this is a safe way of sharing that. So that's why I'm excited.
Terrific. And Owen?
Well, the beauty of going last is I can ride on the coattails of my eloquent co-panelists. I think that, there are plenty of questions out there where members of the MDIAS or Safespace community can think to themselves, wow, if I only knew the answer to this question, I could make a better product, or I could avoid this problem, or I could, solve this other problem. And right now, in the absence of these programs, there are some limitations in terms of what can be done alone. And this provides, these 2 programs provide the ability to bring these stakeholders together in a safe way, so that we can solve problems together. So that's sort of the specific answer. More broadly, I think it really these programs are emblematic of what we want to be doing in a much broader scale. The broader case for quality effort is about how do we collaborate to solve problems rather than solving them one-off on our own, and how does that collaboration lead to better answers and that shared learning can build upon itself. So I see this as these are valuable efforts in and of themselves, but they also set the tone for what we want to see more broadly in the ecosystem.
Terrific. Well, thank you everyone for your participation, and that'll conclude our live Q&A. So thanks again. Thank you to our presenters for these updates and for getting our day 2 off to a fantastic start. Thank you for all of your participation in the session and the live Q&A. Remember to join us later today for the second session, and we will hear from our panel on leadership engagement.